In this video, we'll discuss about the characteristics of life. So first, let's understand what does biodiversity mean. Biodiversity is the wide variety of life. The wide variety of life. This is biodiversity. Now, metabolism. What does metabolism mean? Metabolism is the chemical reactions that occur in the human body. The chemical reactions that occur in a living organism. In a living organism. The next term that we'll discuss is continuity. Continuity is the ability of an organism to exist from one generation to the next. To the next generation. So, continuity is the ability of organisms to exist from one generation to next generation. So, let's read what does the book say. So, we are surrounded by living things. The trees and flowers in the garden, other human beings, our pets and other animals are all organisms. Living things, all living organisms. Even the fungus on the mouldy bread is alive. Biodiversity is a term that describes the wide variety of life. So that's what we've said here. The wide variety of life is the biodiversity. But what do we mean when we say something is alive? How can we define life? There are no simple answers to these questions. However, if we examine how living things work and what they do, we find that organisms have many features or characteristics in common. Let's see what those characteristics are. All living organisms are made up of cells. All living organisms eat food, obtain food to grow and survive. All living organisms are highly organized. Be it the cellular level of organization, tissue level of organization, or even organ system level of organization. So these are highly organized. They respond. They show response to stimuli. And the next thing is that they reproduce. And make new individuals. And show continuity. So continuity is the ability of organisms to exist from one generation to next generation using reproduction. So living organisms are made up of cells. They eat food to help them grow and move so that they have energy, and they get that energy from food. These are highly organized, response to stimuli, and they reproduce and make new individuals. So, while making these new individuals, they even pass on genetic information. This is what continuity is, the ability of organisms to exist from one generation to the next. So, these are the things that living organisms have in common. So, let's see what does the book say. All living things are composed of tiny units called cells. We saw that. These are highly organized. They react to changes in their surroundings, response to stimuli, be it can be an external change or an internal change. They use food to grow and move. They reproduce and pass on information from one generation to the next. Non-living things do none of these. So an organism is a living thing. Biodiversity is a term used to describe the variety of living things on Earth. And life may be defined as something that possesses metabolism and continuity. Metabolism is all the chemical reactions that occur in a living organism. Continuity is the ability of organisms to exist from one generation to the next. So let's see the characteristics of life. The characteristics of life. The first thing we look at is organization. Organization. So what does organization mean? Organization refers to organisms being made up of cells. So it's being made up of cells. Now, there are some organisms which are made up of just a single cell. So, cellular level of organization. And such organisms are called unicellular organisms. So there's unicellular and multicellular. Unicellular organisms are made up of just a single cell. Multicellular organisms are made up of multiple cells. So we know this. Examples of unicellular organisms include amoeba. Multicellular organisms include humans, plants, and fungi, and many other organisms. So this is the cellular level of organization. Now, in cells, there is this structure called as nucleus. And nucleus is like the brain of the cell. It controls the activity of the cell. It controls all the chemical reactions and the whole activity of the cell. That's the nucleus. And nucleus has DNA chromosomes and genes in it. The next level of organization is the tissue level of organization. Tissues. Examples of tissues. Tissues are basically group of cells. Example of tissues: a muscle, made up of muscular cells. Next, organ level of organization. Example of an organ is heart and leaves. So heart is in animals, leaves is in plants. So leaf is an organ in plants. So an organ is a group of tissues. Organ systems, like the vascular system in plants, and circulatory system in animals. These are a few examples of organ systems. Now, let's see what does the book say. An organization refers to organisms being made up of cells which are themselves highly organized, tissues, organs, and systems. These chemicals themselves are not alive, but they combine together to form structures in the cell called as organelles. The organelles, such as the nucleus, carry out particular functions in the cell. The role of the nucleus is to control the cell. So controls the activity of the cell. If it's removed, the cell will die. It's the whole cell working as a unit which carries out the activities of life. Some organisms consist of only one cell, for example, amoeba. In these unicellular organisms, all the processes of life are carried out in a single cell. Most organisms, however, are made up of many cells, and these are called multicellular organisms. Example: jellyfish, earthworms, insects, roses, grass, mushrooms, and human beings. In multicellular organisms, not all the cells are identical, nor do they all have the same job to do. Groups of similar cells form tissues. Muscle is an example of a tissue. Different tissues make up organs. Heart and leaves are examples of organs. And different organs working together form systems of the body. Example, circulatory system in humans, and the different systems form individuals. That's humans or any, like for example, plants, humans, animals, such like that. Next, let's look at nutrition. So this is organization. Let me just erase. So we finished the first characteristic of life, that's organization. Now let's look at nutrition. So what's nutrition? Nutrition is obtaining food. It's obtaining food which provides us energy. So food provides energy. And there is two types of nutrition, autotrophic and heterotrophic. Autotrophic nutrition is the type of nutrition where organisms get the energy from their surroundings. So directly from their surroundings. Example, plants, they get the energy directly from sun, and that process is known as photosynthesis. And sun is a source of energy for plants. For any living organism, sun is the first source of energy from sun, and that's known as photosynthesis. We know this already. Next, heterotrophic, which is the exact opposite of autotrophic. They get food from other animals or plants. Example, animals, including humans. So humans get food from plants and animals. So these are the two types of nutrition, autotrophic nutrition and heterotrophic nutrition. There is one more thing to discuss, that's food chain. Food chain. So food chain, what's food chain? Food chain is a flow of energy in nature. Flow of energy in the nature. And food web is the collection of food chains. So if there's multiple food chains, that's known as food web. So food chain is a flow of energy in nature. And the energy first comes from sun. Comes from the sun. This is nutrition. So nutrition, we usually think of nutrition as something to do with food. More correctly, nutrition is a process by which living things obtain and use food from their surroundings, which provides us energy. Food is needed to provide energy and allow the organism to carry out the characteristics of life. There are two types of nutrition, autotrophic and heterotrophic. Plants are autotrophic. This means they make their own food from simple raw materials in the environment. Plants combine water and carbon dioxide to make food using energy from the sun. This process is called as photosynthesis. Animals, on the other hand, cannot make their own food. So animals are heterotrophs, and heterotrophs obtain food from other animals by eating other animals or plants. As a result, energy from the sun is first passed into plants, and from there it flows from one animal to the next. This flow of energy in nature is known as food chain. So this is nutrition. Now let's discuss about excretion. That's the next characteristic of life. So what exactly is excretion? Excretion is the removal of waste products from metabolism. So let's discuss. Removal of waste products from metabolism. So waste products from all the chemical reactions that happened in the living organism. So we know what metabolism is. Metabolism is the sum of chemical reactions in a living organism. So all the waste products that come from metabolism, from all the chemical reactions. So the removal of those waste products is known as excretion. Urine is an excretory product, and urine contains nitrogen, made up of nitrogen. It also contains urea, H2O, water and salts. So urine consists of nitrogen, urea, H2O and salts. And urine is made in the liver. And it's excreted by kidneys. So this is one of the excretory product that we know. Sweat is another type of excretory product. And sweat is actually the excess salt that's excreted through skin. So it's excreted through skin. That's sweat. Sweat is excess salt and H2O. So salt and water is excreted through skin, and that's excess of salt and water. So sweat is another excretory product. In plants, there are two types of excretory products: carbon dioxide and oxygen. Carbon dioxide is an excretory product during respiration, and oxygen is an excretory product during photosynthesis. Because if you remember, in photosynthesis equation, which is CO2 plus H2O in the presence of sunlight forms C6H12O6 plus O2, and there is 6 here, 6 and 6. So 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O in the presence of sunlight gives C6H12O6 plus 6 O2. This O2 is oxygen, and that's the byproduct or the waste product in photosynthesis in plants. And plants usually excrete these using stomata. Stomata are tiny pores present on the leaf, and they help in excretion. So let's read about excretion. As a result of chemical reactions that take place in living cells, wastes are produced, which may be harmful. Excretion is the removal of waste products from metabolism. If there was a buildup of harmful wastes, the organisms would be poisoned. Animals like humans produce a nitrogen-containing waste called urine. It contains urea, water, and salts. The urea is made in the liver and passes from the liver to the kidneys in the bloodstream. Excess carbon dioxide gas made in our cells is excreted through the lungs, and excess water and salts are excreted through skin as sweat. Plants do not produce a large amount of nitrogenous waste, so simple waste such as carbon dioxide and oxygen are excreted. Excess oxygen from photosynthesis and carbon dioxide from respiration pass out of the leaves through tiny openings called stomata. Other waste chemicals move into the leaves and are removed when the leaves fall in autumn. So this is excretion. Now let's talk about another characteristic of life, and that is response. Response to stimuli. Now, response is the ability of organisms to react to internal and external change. To react to internal and external change. That's what response is. So it doesn't have to be an external change, it can be an internal change as well. So in animals, there are sense organs which help, and nervous system such as brain and nerves. Nervous system. So response is the ability of organisms to react to internal and external change. In animals, there are sense organs and nervous systems which help in this process. So let's see what the book says. All organisms react to changes in their environment and to things happening inside their bodies. Response is essential for an organism to survive and allow to carry out its daily activities. Animals respond to sound, touch, and light using sense organs and the nervous system. In plants, there are no specific organs, but certain cells in plants respond to the force of gravity and to light, touch, chemicals, and water. The stem of a plant grows in the direction of light so the leaves can get light to make food, and the tentacles of sundew respond to touch. So, nutrition is the getting or producing use of food. Excretion is the removal of wastes. We already looked at that. Response is the ability of organisms to react to both internal and external change. The last type of reproduction, the last type of characteristic of life is reproduction. Reproduction. So let's see the definition of reproduction. Reproduction is the ability of organisms to produce new organisms of its own kind. So it's to produce new organisms of its own kind. That's reproduction. So we know that there are two types of reproduction: asexual and sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, there is just one parent, and in sexual reproduction, there's two parents. So asexual reproduction is carried out by budding, binary fission. So these are some examples of asexual reproduction. And sexual reproduction happens in humans. So asexual reproduction, no sex cells or gametes produced. So there's no gametes. And in sexual reproduction, there are gametes, like the sperm and the egg in humans. Common in single-celled organisms such as in amoeba and in most plants, that's asexual reproduction. And in asexual reproduction, offsprings are identical to the parent, so there's basically clones. So offsprings are really identical to the parent. In sexual reproduction, there's two parents involved, and male and female sex cells are produced, gametes, sperm and the egg. Common in animals and flowering plants, and offsprings are similar to but not identical to parents. So we'll write that here. Offsprings are similar to parents but not identical. This is very important. But not identical. or we can say they're not clones to parents, unlike asexual reproduction. So, reproduction is needed to make sure a particular type of organism survives. We have already seen how the continuity of life is important. So these are the two types of reproduction, asexual and sexual type of reproduction. So it's the ability of an organism to produce new individuals of its own kind. So these are the 5 characteristics of life that we know: organization, nutrition, excretion, response, and reproduction. Let's read the conclusion. Finding a definition of life is not easy. It involves the interaction of metabolism and continuity, both of which involve the characteristics we say all living things possess. Metabolism requires the interaction of organization, nutrition, excretion, and response. Continuity requires organization, nutrition, response, and reproduction. To define something as alive, it must possess and carry out all the characteristics of life we have seen here: organization, nutrition, excretion, response, and reproduction. No one characteristic alone is sufficient. Crystals forming in the laboratory were only thought to be alive because they appear to grow, but they do not reproduce, nor do they respond to change. They can't feed or excrete, and so growth alone does not mean that crystals are alive. Growth in crystals is quite different to growth in living things. Crystals grow by gathering material around themselves from the solution, whereas organisms grow from within their own bodies. So in this video we've looked at the 5 characteristics of life and what does metabolism and continuity mean.